So you've been coding for a while, but you don't see the results you expected after grinding hours each day. Maybe you are following tutorials, and when you try to build something on your own, everything falls apart. I get it. Learning to code is frustrating at times, but if you're serious about improving, you need to go beyond just copying tutorials. You need to think about how you are learning. These are the 4 key things you should focus on. Understand syntax deeply, understanding patterns and paradigms, build things, and try something harder. So this is a cycle of learning to code. It looks simple, but it's not that easy because sometimes we jump steps. Maybe you are at step 1 and you straight away jumps to step 3. Then you will have to go back to step 2 and you get my point. So if you're serious about learning to code, follow these steps. So step number 1 is understanding syntax deeply. Most beginners struggle with syntax. And that's normal. Every programming language has its own set of rules and you need to get comfortable with them. But here's where people make mistake. They just memorize syntax without really understanding what's happening. Think about it like this. If you memorize a sentence in a new language, does that mean you can speak it fluently? No. You need to understand the structure, the grammar, and the why behind it. The same goes for programming. So here's what you should do. Instead of just copying code, try to explain it in plain English. So if you can't explain what a line of code does, you don't understand it well enough. Second, use the official documentation. Don't rely just on YouTube tutorials or videos or blog posts. Learn to read docs because that's where real developers go and write about the important concepts. Number 3, write small snippets of code that focus on just one concept. For example, if you're learning JavaScript, try multiple ways to create a function so that you can really understand how can you create functions. The goal is to stop seeing syntax as random symbols and start recognizing the logic behind them. They are like building blocks, and I would say apply the 80-20 rule. You don't have to learn everything in language. You can use AI to just ask it, what's the 20% I need to learn in JavaScript to get 80% of the benefit? And it will tell you. Point number 2, understanding patterns and paradigms. Syntax is just one step. If you want to improve, you need to recognize patterns in code. Let me give you an example. You've probably written an if-else statement before, right? But have you noticed how often you use them in different scenarios? Conditionals are pattern. They help control logic. The same applies to loops, functions, classes, and design patterns. Once you recognize these patterns, you will write cleaner and more efficient code. And then there's paradigms. Things like procedural programming, object-oriented programming, functional programming. You don't need to be an expert on all of them, but you should understand how they shape the way you write the code. So what you can do? So take one problem and solve it in using different approaches. For example, implement a to-do list using both object-oriented programming and functional programming. Refactor old code to make it more efficient. So look for patterns in what you have written and improve them. Read code written by experienced developers. Open source projects are the great place. You can go and read what other people write and try to understand, try to make sense of that. Patterns and paradigms help you think like a programmer, not just someone who types code. Not only that, when you start building things, you would be using sometimes very opinionated way of implementing things. And that's not actually a bad thing in the beginning because now you know how to do something, and out of that you can maybe create a small feature. Now let's move to point number 3, which is building things. You cannot improve your coding skills if you only watch tutorials and read theory. You have to build things. There's just no way around it. And no, I'm not talking about rewriting the same to-do app 10 times. I mean real projects that solve real problems. So here's the trick. Pick something just outside of your comfort zone. If you have never worked with APIs before, build an API that fetches data. If you have only done front end, maybe try to do some back end. So there are some project ideas you can do. Maybe you build a note-taking app with a local storage so that you can save your data locally, a weather app so that you can pull some data, a task manager with authentication so that you can authenticate a user, and a URL shortener so that you can learn more about databases and backend logic. The key here is to struggle a little. That struggle is where real learning happens. When you Google errors, when you rewrite your code 10 times until it works, that's when you level up. And now let's move to our 4th point, is trying something harder. So once you get comfortable, challenge yourself. Like, the reason many developers stay at the same level for years because they never push themselves. They keep doing what they already know. But if you want to grow, you need to take harder challenges. So here's how. So you can try solving like more lead code question or code stack. You can go to my website and you can try those questions, or you can learn new technology. Maybe if you're doing React, maybe try Node.js. If you are doing MongoDB, why don't you try Postgres? So contributing to open source is another way you can like upskill and try harder things. So every time you push your limits, you expand your skill set. That's how you go from a beginner and pro. So now let's conclude our talk here. So improving your coding skills isn't about following tutorials forever. It's about active learning. So first of all, learn syntax deeply, like stop memorizing them, start to understand them. Recognize patterns and paradigms, build real world projects, and push your limits. If you follow these steps, I promise your coding skills will improve dramatically. It won't happen like overnight, but if you stay consistent, you will look back in 6 months and be shocked how far you have reached. Now, if you find this helpful, let me know in the comments. And I think that's it from today's video. I'll see you next time with a new video. Thanks a lot for watching.